My name is Emily Carter. Last Thanksgiving, my mother stood up in front of 23 relatives and announced something that still feels unreal when I think about it. She said it was time for the family to vote on whether I deserved to remain part of it. Yes, an actual vote. My name was printed on a stack of ballots sitting in the middle of the dinner table right next to the turkey. At first, my cousins thought it was a joke, but my mother wasn't smiling. One by one, people picked up their pens, and one by one, they voted against me. I thought that was the most humiliating moment of my life. I was wrong. Because 30 seconds later, something happened that made everyone in that room look at my mother very differently. If you enjoy stories about family betrayal, hidden truths, and unexpected justice, make sure to like the video, tell me in the comments what city you're watching from, and subscribe for more powerful family stories like this. Now let me tell you how that Thanksgiving night began. Because what started as a simple dinner turned into the moment that changed the way my entire family saw my mother forever. Thanksgiving mornings used to feel warm to me, the kind of warm that starts in the kitchen before the sun is fully up. The smell of coffee, the quiet sound of a house waking slowly, the feeling that for one day every year, people put their arguments aside and remembered they were family. But that morning, I woke up in my small apartment feeling something I couldn't quite explain. Not fear, exactly. Just a strange heaviness in my chest. The clock on my nightstand read 7:12 a.m. Outside my window, the November sky hung gray over the quiet street. Somewhere down the block, I could hear a neighbor starting their car. The heater hummed softly beside my bed. For a moment, I just lay there staring at the ceiling. Thanksgiving. For most people, that meant big kitchens, crowded houses, football games on TV, and laughter around the table. For me, it meant something a little more complicated. I sat up slowly and reached for my phone. No new messages. Just the usual notifications and a group text from my cousins about what time everyone was arriving at my parents' house. My parents' house. Even after moving out 5 years ago, that place still felt like the center of everything, the place where birthdays happened, where Christmas mornings started, where all the old family stories lived in photo frames along the hallway, and where my mother ruled everything. Linda Carter had always been the kind of woman people admired from a distance. Perfectly decorated house, perfect dinners, perfect smiles for neighbors. But living with her had always been different. Growing up, she believed in order, in discipline, in appearances. People are always watching, she used to say. When I was 16, she once made me change clothes 3 times before a family dinner because she said the first 2 outfits made the family look careless. At the time, I thought that was just how mothers were. As I got older, I realized it wasn't quite that simple. I swung my legs out of bed and walked into the kitchen. The floor felt cold under my feet. Coffee first. That was my rule for every difficult day. As the machine started brewing, I leaned against the counter and looked around my quiet apartment. Compared to my parents' big suburban house, the place was tiny. 1 bedroom, a small living room, and a kitchen barely large enough for 2 people. But it was peaceful. No criticism about the way dishes were stacked. No comments about how I should present myself better. Just quiet. I poured the coffee into my favorite mug, the chipped blue one my brother David had given me years ago, and took a slow sip. Then my phone buzzed. The sound echoed louder than usual in the silent apartment. I picked it up, expecting another cousin asking about dessert. Instead, the message was from David. My older brother didn't text much, especially not early in the morning. The message was short. "You're still coming tonight, right?" I frowned and typed back. Of course. Why wouldn't I? The 3 little dots appeared almost immediately, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, another message came through. Mom says tonight we're going to settle something, so just be prepared. I stared at the screen. Settle something? My mother loved drama, but this sounded different. I typed again. Settle what? No reply. I waited a full minute. Nothing. The coffee suddenly didn't taste as warm. I looked back out the window at the gray November sky. For the first time that morning, a strange thought crossed my mind. Maybe this Thanksgiving dinner wasn't going to be like the others. But I had no idea just how strange it would become, and I definitely didn't know that by the end of that night, my entire family would be forced to see my mother in a way they never had before. The drive back home. By 9 o'clock, the sky had turned a pale winter blue. I had already finished my coffee, taken a quick shower, and changed into the sweater my aunt once told me made me look more like part of the family. That comment had been meant as a joke. At least, that's what everyone said afterward. Still, I remembered it. I grabbed my keys, locked my apartment door, and stepped out into the cold morning air. Thanksgiving traffic had already started building on the main roads. Families were heading to grocery stores, bakeries, and relatives' homes across the city. For most people, it was probably the happiest day of the year. For me, it felt like I was driving towards something I didn't fully understand. My parents' house was about 40 minutes away, tucked into one of those quiet suburban neighborhoods where every lawn looked exactly the same. When we were kids, David and I used to ride our bikes down those streets until the streetlights came on. Back then, Thanksgiving meant chaos in the kitchen. My mom would wake up before sunrise, already planning everything down to the minute. Turkey in the oven, pies cooling by the window, relatives arriving one after another. She loved hosting, loved being the center of everything, and to be fair, she was good at it. People always complimented her cooking, her decorations, the way the house looked like something out of a magazine every holiday. But behind the scenes, it wasn't always so perfect. I remembered one Thanksgiving when I was about 12. I had accidentally dropped a bowl of mashed potatoes on the kitchen floor while trying to help. My mom had frozen for a moment, staring at the mess. Then she leaned down and whispered quietly so no one else would hear. Emily, do you know how embarrassing this is for me? I remember standing there with tears in my eyes, holding the empty bowl while guests laughed in the dining room. That was my mother. She didn't yell. She didn't scream. But somehow, she could make you feel like you had ruined something simply by existing in the wrong moment. I shook the memory away as the highway curved toward the suburbs. Maybe I was overthinking things. Maybe David's message had just been his weird way of joking. But then again, David never joked about our mother. The closer I got to my parents' neighborhood, the more familiar everything looked. The gas station where my dad used to buy us ice cream. The small park where David broke his arm trying to jump his bike over a bench. By the time I turned onto Maplewood Drive, the road lined with identical oak trees, my chest had tightened again. And then I saw the house. The white, two-story colonial at the end of the street looked exactly the same as always. Perfect lawn, perfect porch decorations, perfect wreath hanging on the door. But something about it felt different today. As I pulled into the street, I slowed down. Cars lined both sides of the road. Not just my usual relatives' cars. There were at least 20 vehicles parked along the curb. I frowned. We never had that many people for Thanksgiving. As I stepped out of my car, the cold wind brushed across my face. Voices drifted from inside the house. A lot of voices. More than I'd ever heard at one of my mother's dinners. I walked up the driveway slowly. For a second, I considered turning around and leaving, but before I could make that decision, the front door opened. David stepped out onto the porch. The moment he saw me, his expression changed. Not surprise, not happiness, something closer to guilt. He walked down the steps toward me. Emily, he said quietly. I searched his face. Okay, I said slowly. What's going on? David rubbed the back of his neck, something he only did when he was uncomfortable. "You should probably just come inside," he said. My stomach dropped, because suddenly I was very sure of one thing. Whatever my mother had planned for Thanksgiving this year, it definitely wasn't dinner. The strange announcement. The moment I stepped into the house, I knew something was wrong. Not because of what I saw, because of what I felt. My mother's house was always loud on Thanksgiving. Kids running through the hallway, my uncles arguing about football, someone laughing too loudly in the kitchen. But that afternoon, the sound was different. Quieter. Like a room full of people waiting for something. The smell of turkey and cinnamon drifted through the air as I walked into the living room, but no one seemed focused on the food. Instead, almost every chair had been pulled toward the dining table, and nearly 24 relatives were sitting around it. My cousins, my aunts, even relatives I only saw once every few years. Every single one of them turned to look at me. The conversation stopped. The silence made my skin prickle. "Emily's here," someone said softly. My mother stood near the end of the dining table wearing the same elegant burgundy dress she always wore on Thanksgiving. Her posture was perfect, as usual, shoulders straight, hands folded neatly. Her smile, however, didn't quite reach her eyes. "Emily," she said calmly, "you made it." I glanced at David, who had followed me inside. He avoided my eyes. That didn't help my nerves. "What's going on?" I asked. No one answered. My mother gestured toward an empty chair at the table. "Sit down," she said. I hesitated for a moment. Then I walked slowly across the room and took the seat. The table looked exactly like every Thanksgiving table she had ever prepared. The turkey in the center, the cranberry sauce, the mashed potatoes. But there was one thing that had never been there before: a stack of small white papers, perfectly printed, placed neatly beside a bowl of pens. I stared at them for a moment. "What are those?" I asked. My mother picked up one of the papers. She held it between her fingers the way a teacher might hold a test before handing it out. Then she looked around the room. "Thank you all for coming today," she said, her voice smooth and controlled. My aunt shifted uncomfortably in her chair. My cousin looked down at the table, but my mother continued as if everything was perfectly normal. "For years," she said, "our family has tried to avoid certain conversations." Her eyes moved slowly around the room. Then they stopped on me. And sometimes avoiding problems only makes them worse. My stomach tightened. "Mom," David said quietly, "maybe we should—" She raised a hand. David stopped talking immediately. That alone told me this had been planned for a while. My mother looked back at the rest of the family. "Today," she said, "we're going to resolve something that has divided this family for a long time." Someone across the table cleared their throat nervously. I felt 20 pairs of eyes watching me. "What are you talking about?" I asked. Instead of answering, my mother placed the paper she was holding down in front of her. Then she picked up the stack beside the bowl. "These," she said, "are ballots." The word echoed strangely in the quiet room. "Ballots?" I repeated. My mother nodded calmly. "Yes." She began walking around the table, placing one paper in front of each person. No one stopped her. No one questioned it. Each sheet looked identical. Printed text, 2 small boxes, a place to mark a choice. When she reached my seat, she placed one in front of me as well. My hands felt cold as I looked down at it. At the top of the page was a single question. A question that made my chest tighten so suddenly I almost couldn't breathe. Should Emily Carter remain a member of this family? The room stayed completely silent. My mother returned to her seat at the head of the table. Then she folded her hands together and smiled politely. "Please," she said to the room, "take a moment to vote." For a few seconds, no one moved. Not even the kids. The only sound in the room was the faint ticking of the kitchen clock behind my mother's chair. Tick, tick, tick. I stared down at the paper in front of me, reading the same sentence again and again as if maybe my eyes were playing a trick on me. Should Emily Carter remain a member of this family? Remain a member, like I was applying for a club, or a job, or something that could simply be voted away. I slowly looked up. "Mom," I said carefully, trying to keep my voice steady. "This isn't funny." Across the table, my aunt shifted in her seat. My cousin Melissa glanced at her husband as if hoping someone else would speak first, but my mother simply folded her hands together. "Oh, Emily," she said calmly, "no one is laughing." That was true. Not a single person at that table looked amused. "Linda," my uncle said hesitantly, "maybe we should just—" My mother cut him off with a gentle smile. "Everyone deserves a voice in family matters," she said. Her tone was polite, measured, almost reasonable, but something underneath it felt sharp, like the edge of a blade hidden beneath silk. "This isn't a family matter," I said. "This is insane." My mother sighed softly as if she were the patient one dealing with a difficult child. "Emily," she said, "please don't make this harder than it needs to be." Harder? I looked around the table again. 23 relatives, every single one holding a ballot. Some stared down at the paper like it was a homework assignment they didn't understand. Others avoided looking at me entirely. David leaned forward suddenly. "Mom, seriously," he said. "You can't expect people to—" David. Just his name. That was all my mother said. But it stopped him instantly. He leaned back in his chair, jaw tight. My father sat 2 seats away from me. His eyes were fixed on the table. He hadn't said a word since I walked in. "Dad?" I said quietly. "Nothing." My mother picked up one of the pens from the bowl. "I know this may feel unusual," she continued smoothly, "but families sometimes need to confront difficult truths." "Truths?" I repeated. "Yes." Her eyes met mine. "And sometimes certain members of the family create ongoing problems." The words landed like stones in my chest. "So that's what this is?" I asked. My mother didn't answer. Instead, she looked around the table again. "You've all heard the stories," she said to the room. My stomach tightened. Stories? I had no idea what she was talking about, but the way some of my relatives avoided my gaze made something very clear. They thought they knew something about me. Something bad. "Please," my mother said calmly, "take a moment to mark your vote." No one moved. At first. Then my aunt slowly picked up a pen. My heart dropped. "Wait," I said quickly. Every head turned toward me. "You're seriously going to do this?" I asked the room. No one answered. One by one, the pens started moving. The vote. The sound of pens scratching against paper filled the room. Soft, quick, final. I sat frozen in my chair, watching it happen. Watching my own family decide whether I belonged with them. My cousin Melissa avoided looking at me as she checked one of the boxes. My uncle sighed heavily before marking his paper. Even my grandmother, who always hugged me twice when she saw me, slowly lowered her pen to the ballot. The strangest part was how ordinary everything looked. The turkey still steamed in the center of the table. The candles still flickered softly. The mashed potatoes were still perfectly shaped in a bowl, like nothing in the world was wrong. But somehow the entire room felt colder. Finally, the scratching stopped. My mother stood up again. "Thank you," she said. She walked around the table, collecting the ballots one by one. Each sheet slid neatly into the stack in her hands. When she reached me, she paused. "You didn't vote," she said. I looked up at her. "Why would I?" She tilted her head slightly. "You're still part of this family. For the moment, she said. The words felt like ice in my veins. She placed the final ballot onto the stack and returned to the head of the table. The room had gone so quiet I could hear someone breathing behind me. My mother began counting, one paper at a time. She opened the first ballot, then the second, then the third. Her expression didn't change, not even a little. By the time she reached the 10th, my stomach had twisted into a knot. David leaned forward again. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. My mother ignored him. She finished counting. Then she placed the ballots neatly on the table. For a moment she didn't speak. The suspense hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. Finally she looked up. "Well," she said calmly, "the family has spoken." My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. She folded her hands together. 22 votes, she said. A pause. Against. The word echoed through the room. Someone gasped quietly. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. Because for a moment my brain refused to process what she had just said. 22. 22 members of my family had just voted that I didn't belong. My mother watched me carefully, almost like she was waiting for something. Maybe tears, maybe anger, maybe humiliation. Instead, I slowly pushed my chair back. The legs scraped softly against the floor. And for the first time since I walked into that house, I finally spoke. "Okay," I said quietly. The room went completely silent again. I looked directly at my mother. "If that's how everyone feels?" I paused. Then I added one sentence that made several people around the table suddenly look nervous. "Then maybe it's finally time we talk about what really happened." For a moment, no one spoke. The words I had just said hung in the air like smoke. Maybe it's finally time we talk about what really happened. Across the table, my mother's polite smile didn't disappear, but it tightened. Just a little. "Emily," she said calmly, "this really isn't the time for dramatics." Dramatics? I almost laughed. "You just had 22 people vote on whether I belong in this family," I said. "And you think I'm being dramatic?" A few relatives shifted in their chairs. My cousin Melissa suddenly looked very interested in her napkin. My mother clasped her hands together on the table. "This vote wasn't meant to hurt you," she said. "No?" Her eyes flickered for a second. "It was meant to address a problem." I leaned forward. "And what problem would that be?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked around the room. "You all know why we're here," she said. Silence. No one actually confirmed that. My stomach twisted, because whatever story my mother had been telling them, they clearly believed it. Finally, my uncle cleared his throat. "Linda said there was an incident," he said carefully. "An incident." I felt my heart sink. "Oh," I said quietly. "So that's the story." My mother straightened slightly. "It's not a story," she said. "It's what happened." I looked directly at her. "Is it?" I asked. For the first time that evening, the room felt like it was holding its breath. My brother David leaned forward again. "Mom," he said slowly, "maybe we should let Emily explain." My mother turned her head. Her voice stayed calm. "Explain what?" David hesitated. Then he said the one thing no one else in the room seemed brave enough to say. "That maybe what you told everyone isn't exactly how it happened." A ripple moved through the table. My aunt frowned. "What do you mean?" David ran a hand through his hair. "I mean," he said, "I was there. That got everyone's attention. Even my father finally looked up." My mother's smile thinned. "You were 12, she said quietly. David didn't back down. Old enough to remember. The room suddenly felt smaller. I could feel eyes moving between the three of us. My mother, my brother, and me. "Fine," my mother said at last. She leaned back in her chair. "Since Emily wants to discuss the past, Let's discuss it. She turned toward the family again. 10 years ago, she said calmly, Emily made a decision that nearly destroyed this family. The words hit the table like a dropped plate. Someone gasped softly. My aunt covered her mouth. I felt my pulse pounding in my ears. My mother continued. She betrayed our trust, she said. And if it weren't for certain sacrifices, she paused dramatically. This family might not even have this house anymore. The room exploded with whispers. What? Wait, what happened? Is that true? I looked around the table. Every single face was staring at me now. Judging, confused, suspicious. Except David. He looked furious, and suddenly I understood something. My mother hadn't just humiliated me tonight. She had been preparing this moment for years. I slowly folded my hands on the table. Then I asked the one question that made her expression change again. Mom, I said quietly, if I almost destroyed this family... I paused. Then why didn't you ever tell them the part where you asked me to do it? Cliffhanger. The room realizes the story may be completely different. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything that had happened that night. My mother blinked once. Just once. But it was enough for me to see something crack in her perfect composure. Emily, she said carefully, that's not... Isn't what? David interrupted. His voice was louder now. For the first time that evening, he sounded angry. Isn't what happened? My mother turned toward him slowly. You're misunderstanding the situation. No, David said. I remember it. That word hit the table like a hammer. Remember. A few relatives looked between us again. My aunt frowned. What exactly are we talking about? She asked. David looked around the room. Then he sighed. 10 years ago, he said, Dad lost his job. Several people nodded. That part everyone knew. It wasn't just losing his job, David continued. The company was collapsing. There were lawsuits, debt. My father's shoulders sank lower in his chair. The room grew quiet again. And the bank was about to take the house, David added. More whispers spread through the table. What? Seriously? My mother's jaw tightened. That's not relevant, she said sharply. It is relevant, David replied. Because suddenly everyone understood something. This wasn't just a family argument. This was about money and survival. I leaned forward slightly. Tell them the rest, I said. David looked at me for a moment. Then he nodded. The bank gave Mom and Dad one option, he said. One way to keep the house. He looked at our mother, but she didn't speak. So he continued. They needed someone to take responsibility for the debt. Confused murmurs filled the room. What do you mean? Like co-signing? Who would do that? David looked back at me. Then he said quietly, Emily did. The room went still. My cousin Melissa blinked. You mean, you helped them? David nodded. She signed the papers, he said. She took the financial hit so the bank wouldn't take the house. My aunt frowned. Then why would that be a problem? David's voice hardened. Because the paperwork made it look like Emily was responsible for the debt. Understanding began to spread slowly across the room, like a ripple moving through water. Someone whispered, So that's the incident Linda told us about? My mother spoke quickly. That's not the full story. No, David said. It isn't. He turned toward the family again. The part Mom left out, he said slowly, is that the whole thing was her idea. Gasps filled the room. My mother's chair scraped against the floor as she stood. That's enough, she said sharply. But the damage was already done. For the first time that evening, the family wasn't looking at me. They were looking at her. For several long seconds, no one said anything. The air in the dining room felt thick, like a storm had rolled in without warning. My mother was still standing beside her chair, one hand resting on the table. Her face had gone pale, but her posture remained rigid, controlled, always controlled. "That's not how it happened," she said. Her voice was calm again, but there was something sharper underneath it now. David leaned forward. "Then tell them how it happened." My mother's eyes flashed. "I will," she said. She turned toward the rest of the family, smoothing the front of her dress as if preparing for another speech. "Emily signed financial documents without understanding the consequences," she explained. "Her decisions created years of hardship for this family." A murmur spread across the table. Several relatives nodded slowly. That version sounded believable, responsible, clean. Except for one problem. It wasn't true. I leaned back in my chair, studying her. She had told the story before, probably many times. The confidence in her voice proved that. But something was different tonight. Tonight, there were witnesses. "Mom," David said quietly, "you're leaving something out." She ignored him. Instead, she looked at me. "You always had a habit of acting impulsively," she continued. "Even when you were young." I almost smiled, because suddenly I understood her strategy. If she kept talking long enough, if she kept controlling the narrative, the room might forget what David had just said. But David didn't forget. Neither did I. "You're right," I said calmly. Her eyes snapped back to me. "I did sign the paperwork," I continued. Several relatives nodded again. "See? Case closed." Except I hadn't finished. "But there's something else they should know." My mother's fingers tightened slightly against the table. I noticed. Maybe no one else did. "What's that?" my uncle asked. I looked around the room slowly. 23 relatives, all of them waiting, all of them trying to decide who to believe. "Before I signed anything," I said carefully, "Mom and I met with the bank together." That got everyone's attention. My aunt frowned. "You were both there?" "Yes." My mother spoke quickly. "That meeting was simply—" I raised my hand slightly. "And for the first time in my life—" She stopped talking. "The bank manager explained the situation very clearly," I said. I could still picture the office, the gray desk, the stack of papers. The look on my father's face that day. "They told us the house would be repossessed within 2 weeks." Gasps rippled across the room. Several relatives looked toward my father. He still hadn't spoken. His eyes were fixed on the table. "So yes," I continued quietly. "I signed the documents." My cousin Melissa leaned forward. "But if that saved the house, why would your mom say you almost destroyed the family?" The room fell silent again. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line. I looked directly at her. "Because," I said slowly, "she never told them what she said to me in that bank office." David's chair creaked as he leaned forward again. "What did she say?" someone asked. I held my mother's gaze, and finally answered. "She told me that if I didn't sign those papers—" I paused. "She and Dad would lose everything." The room went completely still. Then I added the part my mother had hoped no one would ever hear. "And she also said that if things went wrong, the family would blame me, not her." The family realizes the manipulation may have been intentional. You could feel the shift in the room. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was unmistakable. Before, everyone had been looking at me. Now, they were looking at my mother. "Linda," my aunt said slowly, "that's not what you told us." My mother's jaw tightened. "She's twisting the story," she said. David laughed bitterly. "Seriously?" He gestured toward me. "Emily was 21. She took responsibility for a debt that wasn't even hers. That was her choice," my mother snapped. "No," David said. "You made it her choice." The tension snapped tighter. My uncle leaned toward my father. Mark, he said quietly, you were there too, right? My father finally looked up. For the first time that evening, everyone's attention turned to him. He looked older than I remembered. Smaller somehow. His hands were folded together on the table. Mark? My aunt repeated. My father swallowed. Yes, he said quietly. My mother turned toward him sharply. Mark, don't. But the damage had already begun. He took a long breath. Then he spoke again. The bank situation was worse than we told everyone, he admitted. Whispers spread through the room. How bad? Were you going bankrupt? My father nodded slowly. If Emily hadn't signed those documents, the house would have been taken. My aunt frowned. But that means she saved it. Yes, my father said. The word landed heavily. My cousin Melissa blinked. Then why would Linda say Emily almost destroyed the family? No one answered immediately. My mother's eyes moved quickly around the room, searching for control again. But it was slipping. Fast. Because the paperwork made it look like Emily was responsible for the debt, my father said quietly. More whispers, confusion, understanding, and then something else. Suspicion. But that still doesn't explain the story you told us, my uncle said. My mother's voice hardened. Because the situation was complicated. David shook his head. No, he said. It wasn't. He looked around the table. You all remember how Mom described that situation, right? Several relatives nodded slowly. She said Emily made reckless financial decisions, David continued, that she almost cost the family the house. My aunt looked shocked. That's exactly what she told us. David leaned back in his chair. And now you know the truth. The silence that followed felt heavier than before, because everyone in that room was starting to realize the same thing. For 10 years, they had believed a story about me, a story my mother had told them. And now that story was falling apart, piece by piece. My mother finally spoke again, her voice colder than before. You're all forgetting something, she said. Everyone turned toward her. This family would not have survived that crisis without sacrifice. No one disagreed. But then she looked directly at me. And Emily didn't do it out of kindness, she added. The accusation hung in the air. Then why did she do it? My cousin asked. My mother smiled slightly, a thin, dangerous smile, because she made the mistake in the first place. The room erupted in confused voices. What mistake? What are you talking about? My mother leaned back in her chair. Her eyes locked onto mine, and she delivered the line she had clearly been waiting to say all night. Emily didn't just sign the paperwork. She paused, then finished the sentence slowly. She was the reason the bank started looking at our finances in the first place. Mother launches a new accusation that could destroy Emily again. The room exploded with confused voices. What do you mean? What mistake? Emily caused the bank investigation? My mother didn't rush to answer. She simply sat there, hands folded neatly in front of her, watching the chaos she had just created. It was a tactic she'd used my entire life. Say something shocking, then let everyone else fill in the blanks. I leaned back slowly in my chair. For a moment, I almost admired the strategy. Almost. Because I could see exactly what she was doing. She was trying to regain control of the story. David, however, wasn't buying it. Mom, he said sharply, you can't just throw that out there without explaining. My mother tilted her head slightly. Oh, I can explain, she said. Her eyes shifted toward me, but Emily might not enjoy the explanation. A few relatives exchanged nervous looks. My aunt frowned. Well, she said, what are you talking about? My mother inhaled slowly. 10 years ago, she said, Emily made a financial decision without consulting anyone in the family. My stomach tightened. Here it comes. She opened a credit account, my mother continued, in order to help a friend. That was true, but it wasn't the whole story. She didn't tell us, my mother said. And when the account went into default, the bank started reviewing the family's financial history. Murmurs spread through the room. That's how they discovered our situation, she said, and that's when the house nearly went into foreclosure. Several relatives turned toward me again, not as hostile as before, but uncertain. My cousin Melissa spoke carefully. Emily, is that true? I didn't answer immediately, because technically, yes, part of it was true. I did help a friend, I said finally. David frowned. What friend? Before I could respond, my mother spoke again. The point is, she said, Emily's irresponsible decision triggered the entire financial crisis. There it was, the narrative she had probably rehearsed for years. Clean, logical, convincing, except for one small problem. It still wasn't the truth. I looked around the table slowly. Then I sighed. Mom, I said quietly, you're right about one thing. Her eyes flickered. Which is? She asked. I did help someone, I said. The room waited. But you forgot to mention who that person was. My mother's smile disappeared. And for the first time that night, she looked nervous. The family realizes the story still isn't complete. No one moved. The room felt frozen in place. My mother stared at me as if she could somehow will me to stop talking. But it was too late for that. You helped a friend? My uncle asked. Yes, I said. My mother leaned forward quickly. That's exactly what I just said. But I shook my head. No, I replied calmly. You said I helped a friend. I paused. What you didn't say is that the friend was you. The silence that followed was absolute. You could hear the wind outside brushing against the windows. My aunt blinked. What? David looked at me. Wait. What? I kept my eyes on my mother. Remember the credit account? I asked her. She didn't respond. Remember the day you came to my apartment crying? Her fingers tightened slightly on the table. You said the bank had frozen one of your business accounts, I continued. You said you needed temporary credit to cover expenses until things were sorted out. Several relatives leaned forward now, listening closely. You promised it would only be for a few weeks, I said. You promised you would close the account before anyone even noticed. David's expression slowly changed, from confusion to realization. Mom, he said quietly, is that true? My mother's voice hardened. That's not relevant. It's extremely relevant, David said. My cousin Melissa looked shocked. So the credit account wasn't Emily's idea? No, I said. It wasn't. My mother finally spoke again, her voice colder now. I asked for help. She said the words reluctantly, but Emily handled the situation irresponsibly. I almost laughed. In what way? You let the account fall behind? She said. That's what triggered the bank's review. The room turned toward me again. I nodded slowly. Yes, I said. I did let the account fall behind. Then I added the part she had hoped no one would ever hear. Because by that point, I paused. You had already stopped answering my calls. Gasps spread across the table. My aunt covered her mouth. You mean she left you with the debt? I nodded. For 6 months. My mother stood up abruptly. That's enough, she said. But the room was no longer listening to her. For the first time that night, everyone was looking at her the way the title promised. Very differently. The family begins realizing the betrayal may belong to the mother. The room felt different now. Before, the silence had been heavy with judgment. Now it was heavy with realization. My aunt slowly lowered her hand from her mouth. Linda, she said carefully, is that true? My mother didn't answer immediately. She remained standing at the head of the table, her posture stiff, her eyes moving quickly from face to face. For years she had controlled every conversation in this house, every holiday, every family gathering. But tonight, something had changed. People weren't waiting for her to speak anymore. They were waiting for answers. My cousin Melissa leaned forward. "So Emily took on the debt to help you, and then you left her with it?" My mother's expression hardened. "That's not what happened." David shook his head slowly. "Then explain what did happen." My mother exhaled sharply. "The situation was complicated," she said. "That's not an explanation," David replied. I sat quietly, letting the conversation move around the table, because for the first time that night, I didn't feel like I had to defend myself. The truth was doing that on its own. My uncle looked at me. "How much debt are we talking about?" he asked. I hesitated, because I had never actually said the number out loud to the family, not once in 10 years. $38,000, I said finally. Gasps spread through the room. "What? You were 21? You carried that alone?" I nodded. "At first I thought Mom would fix it," I said. "She told me the account would be closed quickly." My cousin frowned. "But it wasn't." "No," I said quietly. "It wasn't." The memory still felt sharp. Phone calls that were never returned, messages ignored, bills arriving in envelopes I didn't know how to handle. My mother crossed her arms. "You're exaggerating," she said. That made David laugh. Not a friendly laugh. The kind of laugh people make when they can't believe what they're hearing. "Exaggerating?" he repeated. "Emily worked 2 jobs for 3 years. Several relatives turned toward me again." "You did?" Melissa asked. I nodded. "Nights at the hospital cafeteria," I said. "Weekends at a retail store." The room went silent again. My aunt shook her head slowly. "Linda," she said, "why didn't you tell us any of this?" My mother's answer came instantly. "Because it wasn't relevant." That sentence changed the atmosphere in the room completely. For the first time that night, people didn't look confused. They looked angry. And then my father spoke again, quietly, but clearly. "There's something else they should know." The father prepares to reveal something even bigger. When my father spoke, the entire room turned toward him. That almost never happened. Growing up, my dad had always been the quiet one, the man who stayed out of arguments, the man who let my mother handle everything. But now he looked different, tired, older, like the weight of 10 years had finally caught up with him. "Mark," my mother said sharply. But he didn't stop. "The debt Emily took on," he said slowly, "wasn't actually the biggest problem we had." Confused murmurs spread across the table. "What do you mean?" my uncle asked. My father looked at me. For a moment, I thought he might apologize. Instead, he said something I hadn't expected. "She saved us twice." The room froze. My cousin Melissa blinked. "Twice?" My father nodded. "The credit account helped us delay the foreclosure process," he explained, "but it didn't solve the entire problem." My aunt frowned. "So what did?" My father hesitated. Then he said the words that finally shattered the last piece of my mother's story. "Emily used her college savings." My heart skipped, because I had never told anyone that part. Not even David. "What?" Melissa whispered. "You mean your tuition money?" My father nodded slowly. "She emptied the account," he said. "Every dollar she had saved for school." The room erupted. "You're kidding. That's insane. She gave up college for this?" I stared down at the table. The memory still hurt. My cousin looked at me. "Emily, is that true?" I nodded. "I planned to go back later," I said quietly. "But life got complicated." David stared at me in disbelief. "You never told me that?" I shrugged slightly. It didn't seem important. Across the table, my mother's face had gone pale, because this was the one part of the story she had never been able to twist. Not without sounding cruel. My aunt turned toward her slowly. "So let me understand this," she said. "Emily saved the house. She paid off your credit problem. And she gave up her college fund to do it." She paused, then asked the question everyone in the room was now thinking. "Why on earth would you turn the whole family against her?" My mother opened her mouth, but this time, no explanation came. The entire family now questions the mother's motives. No one spoke after my aunt asked the question. Why would you turn the whole family against her? The dining room felt suddenly smaller, as if the walls had moved closer to the table. For years, my mother had controlled every conversation in this house, every holiday dinner, every family gathering, every decision. But now, 23 relatives were staring at her in silence, waiting. My mother stood at the head of the table, one hand resting on the back of her chair. Her posture was still straight, still composed, but something in her expression had shifted. For the first time that night, she looked cornered. "You're all acting like I'm some kind of monster," she said finally. No one rushed to defend her. My cousin Melissa leaned forward slowly. "Linda," she said carefully, "Emily carried $38,000 of debt for you. She worked 2 jobs, and she gave up her college fund to help save this house." Melissa shook her head. "So why spend 10 years telling everyone she almost destroyed the family?" The room went quiet again. My mother looked around the table, searching for support, but the faces she saw were different now. Confused, disappointed, suspicious. David spoke next. "Mom," he said quietly, "just tell the truth." My mother let out a short, bitter laugh. "The truth?" she repeated. Her eyes moved to me, then back to the rest of the family. "You want the truth?" she said. "Fine." She pointed across the table at me. "The truth is that Emily was always the one everyone trusted." The room stayed silent. My uncle frowned. "I don't understand." My mother's voice grew sharper. Every time something went wrong, people expected Emily to fix it. Not me. Not Mark. Her. David stared at her. "You're saying you were jealous?" My mother didn't answer right away, but she didn't deny it either. Instead, she looked directly at me. "You walked into that bank like you were the one running the family," she said. "You solved a problem I couldn't solve." Her voice trembled slightly now. "And after that, everyone started looking at you differently." I felt a chill run through me, because suddenly, everything made sense. My mother looked around the room one last time, then she said the words that finally broke the illusion she had protected for 10 years. "So yes," she admitted quietly, "I let everyone believe Emily caused the problem." A few people gasped. My mother shrugged faintly. It was easier than admitting she saved us. For a few seconds after my mother spoke, no one in the room seemed able to move. It was as if her confession had sucked all the air out of the house. Then the sound came all at once. A sharp breath from my aunt, a chair scraping against the hardwood floor. Someone at the far end of the table whispering, "Oh my God." I looked around slowly. The same faces that had avoided my eyes less than an hour earlier were now fixed on my mother with disbelief. Not confusion anymore, not uncertainty. Disbelief. "You let us think that about her?" Melissa asked, her voice cracking. "For 10 years?" My mother opened her mouth, but this time nobody waited for her answer. "That's cruel, Linda," my uncle said flatly. My grandmother, who had been quiet all evening, pressed a hand to her chest. "Emily was just a girl." I didn't realize how tightly I was gripping the edge of my chair until my fingers started to hurt. Across the table, my father finally lifted his head. He looked at me first. Not my mother. Me. "I should have stopped it," he said quietly. The room fell silent again, but it was a different silence now. The kind that comes when something true has finally been spoken aloud. I knew she was letting the story spread, he said, his voice rough with shame. Maybe not at first, but after a while, I knew. I swallowed hard, because somehow that hurt more than anything my mother had done. Not the lie, not the ballots, the silence. You let me carry it alone, I said. My father closed his eyes for a second. Yes, he said. No excuses, no speech, just yes. David stood up so suddenly his chair tipped backward and hit the floor. The sound made everyone jump. He looked at my mother with a kind of anger I had never seen in him before. You humiliated her in front of this whole family, he said, after everything she did for you. David, my mother started. No. His voice cut through the room. No more speeches, no more excuses. You don't get to do that tonight. Then he reached across the table and grabbed the stack of ballots still sitting beside the bowl of pens. For 1 second, my mother looked shocked. As if, even now, she believed those papers still meant something. David held them up. This, he said, his voice shaking, is disgusting. And before anyone could stop him, he tore the ballots in half, then in half again. Paper fell across the table like pale confetti. A few pieces landed beside the turkey. A few drifted into the gravy dish. No one laughed. No one even smiled. Because it didn't feel funny. It felt final. My cousin Melissa stood next. Then my aunt. One by one, voices began to rise around me. I'm sorry, Emily. I should have asked you. I should never have believed that. My grandmother reached for my hand. I let her take it. Across the room, my mother remained standing, but she no longer looked like the woman who had controlled the evening. She looked smaller. Not powerless exactly, but exposed. And for the first time all night, every person in that room was no longer waiting for my mother to speak. They were waiting for me. I pushed my chair back slowly and stood up. When I stood up, every voice in the room disappeared. The apologies stopped. The whispering stopped. Even the sound of people shifting in their chairs faded away. 23 pairs of eyes turned toward me. For most of my life, that kind of attention would have terrified me. But tonight felt different. Tonight I finally understood something. For 10 years I had been carrying a story that wasn't mine, and now it was finally back where it belonged. I looked at my father first. He still hadn't lifted his eyes from the table. Dad, I said quietly. He looked up slowly. I know you were scared, I said. The words surprised even me, but being scared doesn't mean you get to stay silent. He nodded once, a small, broken nod. Then I looked at David. He gave me a slight smile, the kind that said, I'm here. That helped more than he probably realized. Finally, I turned toward my mother. She was still standing at the head of the table, but she looked very different now. Smaller. Not because she had physically changed, because the power she used to hold in this room was gone. You wanted a vote tonight, I said. No one moved. You wanted the family to decide if I belonged here. My mother didn't answer, so I continued. For 10 years, I said, I let everyone believe a story that wasn't true. Several relatives lowered their eyes again. I did that because I thought protecting this family mattered more than protecting myself. My voice didn't shake. Not anymore. But tonight made something very clear. I paused. Then I said the words I had never allowed myself to say before. A family that needs a vote to decide if you belong isn't really a family. The silence that followed was deeper than any silence earlier that night. I could hear someone crying softly near the end of the table. My grandmother squeezed my hand, but I gently pulled it away, because I wasn't finished yet. I looked around the room one more time. I appreciate the apologies, I said, and I believe some of you mean them. Then my eyes returned to my mother. But I don't need a vote. I reached down and picked up one of the torn ballot pieces from the table. The paper felt thin between my fingers. Fragile. I held it up briefly, then let it fall back onto the table. I never needed one. Across the room, my mother finally spoke. Her voice was quieter than I had ever heard it. Emily. But I shook my head. No. For the first time in my life, I didn't wait for her approval. I spent 10 years trying to earn my place in this family, I said. I took a slow breath. I'm done doing that. And as I stepped away from the table, something shifted in the room again. Not anger, not guilt. Something closer to respect. But by then, it didn't matter anymore. Because for the first time in 10 years, I wasn't asking anyone in that room if I belonged. 3 months later, the house felt very different. Not quieter, just different. The air in the kitchen no longer carried the tension that had filled it that Thanksgiving night. In fact, I hadn't stepped inside this house since that evening, not because anyone had told me not to come back, but because for the first time in my life, I realized something important. I didn't need to keep returning to a place that had once questioned whether I belonged. Instead, I built something new. My apartment across town wasn't large, but it was mine. Every bill in my name, every decision my own. And strangely enough, life felt lighter than it had in years. David visited sometimes. The first time he showed up, he brought takeout and an awkward apology. I should have defended you sooner, he said. I believed him, because the guilt in his voice wasn't fake. My father called a few weeks later, not to argue, not to explain, just to say 2 words. I'm sorry. For him, that was probably the hardest sentence he had ever spoken. Some of the extended family reached out too. Texts, phone calls, even handwritten letters. People trying, in their own clumsy ways, to undo 10 years of believing the wrong story. I appreciated it. But something inside me had changed. I wasn't waiting for their approval anymore. One afternoon in early spring, a small envelope arrived in my mailbox. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. My mother's. For a long time, I just stared at it. Part of me expected anger. Another accusation. Maybe even another attempt to twist the story. Finally, I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No long explanation, no dramatic apology. Just one short paragraph. I spent 10 years pretending you embarrassed me, it said. The truth is, I was embarrassed by myself. I read the sentence again, and again. There was no request for forgiveness, no attempt to ask me to come back. Just that one admission. For the first time in a long time, I smiled. Not because everything was suddenly fixed. Not because the past had disappeared, but because something important had finally happened. The truth had been spoken. And the strange thing about the truth is this. Once it's out in the open, you don't have to carry it alone anymore. That Thanksgiving, my family tried to decide if I belonged. Months later, I finally understood something. Belonging was never something they had the power to vote on. It was something I had the power to choose. Looking back now, that Thanksgiving didn't destroy my family. It revealed it. For 10 years, I believed that silence was the price of keeping peace. I thought protecting everyone else meant accepting the role they quietly placed on me. The girl who caused the problem. The daughter who almost ruined everything. But the truth is much simpler than that. Sometimes the people who judge us the loudest are the ones trying to hide their own mistakes. And sometimes the moment that feels like humiliation is actually the moment you finally take your life back. That night, my family tried to decide whether I belonged, but the real lesson I learned was this. Belonging is not something other people get to vote on. It's something you decide for yourself. If you've ever felt misunderstood by your own family or blamed for something that was never truly yours to carry, remember this. You are allowed to step away from the story others write about you and start writing your own.